Today's topic is climate smart agriculture. It's part of a series from VegaMX, a for-profit company that's an ag tech company. Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you once again. Today, we are lucky to have with us Vikram Mehta, a research scientist, runs his own institute, thinks a lot about climate and agriculture, and about India. Let's hear from Vikram.
Thank you very much, Subodh. I'm very happy to be on your show. Just to add a little bit to provide background, I was a NASA scientist for over 12 years and then got out in 2002 to set up my own nonprofit research organization in Maryland. It's called the Center for Research on the Changing Earth System. And over the last 20 years or so since its founding, we have done quite a bit of work on climate variability science, also climate predictability science, and how climate impacts worldwide society, especially on water resources and agriculture. And if you want more information about the work that we have been doing, you can go to our website, www.crces.org. And I'll be very happy to answer any questions. You can email to me, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Okay, so let's start with this. Today, I would like to talk about the very serious water and food insecurities that India is facing, and that is even without future climate change. Projected climate change and associated extreme events such as heat waves, sea level rise, and their impacts will make these and other insecurities really severe. Okay. As history shows, adaptation to driving forces of human societies, climate is not the only thing. There are so many others. But that's the only option for civilizations to survive and flourish. And many civilizations in the past have tried to adapt to their changing environment with some success, but ultimately all of them have died because they just could not cope with the changing environment. Without appropriate adaptation to all major driving forces, and now I am talking mainly about India today. So without appropriate adaptation to all major driving forces, climate change being one of them, India faces a bleak future in the next 20 to 30 years or even sooner. The lessons that we have learned from the past, all the way from the Harappan civilization going back more than 4,000 years to the present, all the lessons are really stark about this, that unless India adapts, it's going to be very bad very soon.
Okay, Vikram, can I just interrupt
Sure.
for the sake of the viewers that much of the talk we hear these days when we talk about climate change is what is about solar and wind power and energy efficiency and so on. That is an attempt to fight climate change, or what we technically call as mitigation. What Dr. Mehta is talking about is, look, it's going to happen, and we need to adapt to it. And that's what we call adaptation. There's been much less focus on adaptation, but the time has come for all of us to realize that putting up more solar, putting up more windmills, etc., is not going to be enough. There's going to be climate change, and we must adapt to it. And I'm so happy that Dr. Mehta has pointed this out so eloquently. Thank you. So let's proceed.
Right. So thanks for the clarification. Yes, adaptation is distinctly different from mitigation. I'm not talking about mitigation. In our everyday life, even without thinking consciously, we adapt to the environment. For example, if there is a weather forecast which says there is, like 70% chance of rain today, so we try and take an umbrella. If we are prudent and if we believe the forecast, we try and take an umbrella with us. So in case it rains, we would be well protected. If not, then the consequences can be pretty bad, resulting in serious illness and so on and so forth. Similarly, when crossing a street and the light is red, we adapt. We don't try and just go across, because we know that it's very dangerous to cross the street if the light, the pedestrian light is red. So we wait until the light turns green, and even then, the more prudent among us would look both left and right and see that nothing is coming, nobody is jumping their red light, and then we cross the street. So adaptation is built into our psyche, into our daily practices since time immemorial. And the reason why we are here is because of adaptation through evolution. And so adaptation is really fundamental to not only human life, but life of all creatures. Okay. So we need to adapt, yes, but ad hoc attempts can easily lead to maladaptation, so making the situation maybe even worse. And so now there is a worldwide movement to develop adaptation as a collection of sciences, um, mainly two. One, the science for adaptation, and the second, the science of adaptation. And I'll explain this very simply. Science for adaptation is the science that you need to do for adaptation, meaning, for example, weather forecast, climate forecast, how weather and climate in the next, let's say, day to the next 10 years will impact hydrology, river flows, soil moisture, etc., etc. So that is all science that is lumped under science for adaptation, which largely consists of what we might call hard sciences based on physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics. The other part of adaptation sciences is now what is being increasingly called the science of adaptation. Okay, so you have all these forecasts. How do you apply in a given location or a given time frame? Now that becomes a much more less hard scientific oriented and much more soft science or no science. Things such as politics, all social sciences, economics. So the effort is now to develop that whole ensemble of fields that one would have to understand the complexities of the society, and how the whatever potential answers that the sciences for adaptation can give you in terms of forecasts and so on, how you would apply and what would be the impacts on society. So that part is really complex. And when you put the two of them together, it's really, really very complex. But then human race has not advanced so far, without doing very complex things. And so we should be able to deal with this as well. Now, it also includes trying to understand, the imperatives of politicians and bureaucrats in making decisions and implementing them. So can we,
Right.
for example, can we develop mathematical models of political behavior, of bureaucratic decision making, so that you can plug in then the forecast of various things, like, for example, weather, climate, water flow in rivers, soil moisture, etc. You plug in those forecasts into models of political behavior, bureaucratic decision making, and then see what kind of outcome actually comes out for societies. And
Okay. So what you're saying is it's from the beginning to the end. You start with first understanding what will happen and then what people are likely to do, and then you see the outcome, right?
exactly. So essentially, an end-to-end set of processes
Okay.
which you can then use to develop options.
Okay.
And then you have to develop metrics as to how are you going to evaluate the options. And then once you decide to implement a particular option, you have to evaluate the efficacy of that option using objectively derived metrics. So as I said, it's a very ambitious effort. But without that, I think the world, not just India, most of the world is going to be in really deep trouble very soon. Okay.
Okay. All right. Let's continue.
So, this is such a large effort that, and there are so many stakeholders in this, that it needs to be pursued as a whole of society endeavor. It's not for a government. It's not just for let's say the federal government or state government or district government or local village panchayats, everybody has to be involved. Not just governments, but civil society organizations, NGOs, private companies, academics, very importantly. Um, and academics largely because governments would be very sensitive to telling people what they don't want to tell them, okay? Because there is always an election around the corner and so on and so forth. So we have to define, there is a saying that speaking truth to power. So what is the truth and what are the powers? So I'll try to touch upon that a little bit later. Um, so the idea of this, setting up these, academic science, the adaptation sciences program would be to generate science-based adaptation options at various space and time scales and for various sectors. Transportation, not just water and agriculture, but transportation, energy, and so on and so forth. Then assessing their potential impacts with objectively derived metrics, implementing optimum options, and then constantly monitoring and modifying as necessary. These are vital actions for successful adaptation. So as you can see, the attempt is to put the entire adaptation effort on a scientific basis.
Okay.
That you gather empirical data, you develop mathematical based, models based on first principles, you try to do simulations, then you come up with metrics and you come up with options, you apply them, see how they are doing. So it's maybe it's a utopian kind of dream, but without that, I think the world is in really going to be in real deep trouble.
Okay, so what are you doing about it? What is happening in India? I think our viewers would be interested in those issues. We heard the theory and the background and the context. Now, what is it that you are doing at Vega? How are you working with Vega? Or what is the thing in India that you would like to see?
Um, well, I am for the last couple of years, 3 years, I am a visiting senior professor in Indian Institute of Technology in New Delhi, and I have taught courses there. And last winter, I taught a course there, an introductory course on adaptation sciences, which attracted a lot of students, and some faculty members were also sort of taking in the course. And so it's the first attempt to develop thinking along these lines in the IIT. And it is quite possible that there may be a center of excellence set up there. And I think I would be involved in that program if it is done. And this program would have essentially four components. First of all, adaptation to what? We need to know if it's going to rain. What's the probability of rain? Otherwise, there is no point in lugging an umbrella everywhere with you. So we need to know adaptation to what in the next year, next 5 years, next 10 years, next 100 years. Then the second question is adaptation for whom?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not that everybody would benefit the same way from any particular adaptation option. So what would be the priorities? For example, efficient use of water. Who should be the maximum beneficiaries? Always, of course, people drinking water, water for sanitation, etc. Then would come maybe agriculture for in Indian case, agriculture, then industrial uses, etc., etc. So adaptation for whom is very, very important. And their political, thinking might also corrupt the purely scientific sort of basis of that. Then how to adapt? So we need to develop adaptation options, as I mentioned earlier, develop models, do simulations, see, what are the most optimum options. Again, keeping in mind the first two questions: adaptation to what and adaptation for whom. So how to adapt? And then finally, how to evaluate planned and actual adaptation. So you have to develop objective metrics. How are you going to evaluate whether the social group that you are trying to, or the or the farmers, or in a particular region, or a particular industry, or let's say inland waterborne transportation, or coastal areas, because rising sea levels are a huge concern for countries such as India with 7,000 plus kilometers of coastline. And already the projections are there that in the next 20, 30 years, Mumbai, Chennai, so many other cities may be largely underwater at high tide. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you going to, what are you going to do about all this? Then what are you
Mm-hmm.
going to do with human migrations, which are likely to be associated with these kinds of climate change impacts? And so there is this urgent need to establish academic programs, because very, very little is known about how societies, the complexities of societies, how they function, how decisions are made, who benefits from decisions, and so on and so forth. So, and then, one size does not fit all. Something that is developed for some part of Africa or South America is not readily applicable to India.
Okay.
So, options have to be developed specifically for Indian conditions. Okay.
Okay. Now, can you talk a little bit about agriculture? Because you said there's food insecurity. What kind of changes might be needed in agriculture?
Right. So I can mention a couple of things. One is there has been quite a few, several studies, I would say, that the groundwater in northwest India, all the way from northern Gujarat uh, and all the way north to Punjab, Haryana, the groundwater is depleting much faster than it can be recharged by river flows and rainfall. So it has become really counterproductive to use scarce electricity to pump out groundwater, quite a bit of which is now brackish because you are really going deep into underground. And so it is becoming more and more expensive to pump out that groundwater and to grow crops, especially crops like rice and sugarcane in these really semi-arid regions with groundwater being the only source or the major source. And so the kind of programs that I am talking about here would look at this holistically, because you can't just say, okay, from next year, you can't pump out any groundwater. Then what are the farmers going to do? How are you going to meet the shortfall in food production? Um, so there has to be a holistic view. That's why I said it has to be a whole of society effort. That so suppose northwest, you want to wean northwest India away from water intensive crops to start with, and then as rising temperatures are making wheat crops more and more sort of less and less viable, the yields are going down because of increasing temperatures. So so you need to attack, you need to address these issues in a holistic way, because what are you going to, what are all those people who live there going to do? Their main livelihood is through agriculture. So what are you
Yeah.
going to do?
Okay.
And so that is one. Another one is in many parts of India nowadays, scarce water is being used to produce water intensive crops like, as I mentioned, sugar and rice. And people take great pride. India takes great pride that we are exporting this food. But mind you, no, there is an increasingly uh, realistic and popular concept being developed, which is called virtual water. That along with all that rice that you export, the sugar that you export, you are exporting scarce water to the tune of billions of liters of water every year.
Right.
And that water can very easily be used by water starved cities, for example, or water starved agriculture of other essential commodities like pulses and fruits and so on and so forth. So again, but then somebody has to bring all these issues to the people. That's what I mentioned earlier. Speaking truth to power.
Okay.
So there are many groups of power or centers of power in any society, starting in a democracy from the basic people who vote in elections, and so all the way up. you need to make people, first of all, aware that these are serious issues staring them in the face. And okay, so by exporting these water intensive crops, you may be earning, the farmers may be earning a few tens of millions of dollars, but then India right now is sitting on more than $500 billion of hard currency. So there is no need for India to earn just a few tens of millions of dollars by exporting scarce water. So again, there needs to be large scale thinking, changes, options developed as to what is to be done, etc., etc.
So what I hear is that there are two types of crops that are risky. One is those that are affected by the heat that is likely to come, and those that take too much water. Okay, because water is now too scarce and it's not going to be there, and the heat of the climate is also going to not allow you to grow the crops that you used to grow. And these crops happen to be things that have been really increasing. This is rice and wheat and sugarcane. These are the growth crops of the past, but that was the past. In the future, we have to think carefully about reducing the focus on these crops, and certainly not encouraging export of water because water is scarce, right?
Right, right.
Right. Okay.
It's not even in the future. The water problems are being faced by people right now, as
Right.
everyone.
I understand. I understand. Right.
Number two. I mean, I know increasing
Hmm.
temperature because of climate change is not the only issue. For
Okay.
example, last spring, just before the wheat in North India were harvested, there was a very sustained and severe heat wave for some time. Okay, and that reduced the wheat yield when it was at a crucial stage when the grain filling actually happens. And
Hmm.
so the initial estimate of how much wheat would be produced by India eventually went down by 20 to 30% because of this heat wave, severe heat wave, which was persistent for a week or 2 weeks or something like that.
Hmm.
And so it is already happening.
Okay.
It's not
All
in the
right.
future.
Okay, let me ask you whether you may or may not know all the details about it, but the floods that happened in Pakistan last year, what are your thoughts about that? Is that climate change, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think we are at the threshold of being able to say conclusively that some events, such as, for example, heavy rainfall or severe heat waves, whether they are happening because of a distinct change in climate, or whether this is just natural variability which has been happening for thousands of years. Okay. Also, in floods, there are, especially in urban areas, um, floods do not directly correlate to rainfall because in urban areas, because of sort of indiscriminate construction, natural drainage channels have been blocked to a large extent. And so, even the same amount of rain which was falling in a particular area, let's say 100 years ago, today can give rise to massive floods because there is no place for the water to go.
Right.
We
Okay.
see that happening in Mumbai, for example, that,
Yes.
that even today, forget about 2030, even today, that when there is high tide during monsoon and there is
Right.
heavy rain in the Western Ghats, practically the whole of Mumbai city gets flooded because there is no place for the water to go.
Right. There's no place for the water to go. Right.
So this,
Okay.
coming back to your question about floods in Pakistan,
Yes.
quite possible also, heat at the right time, whether it is because of climate change or it is natural variability, a heat wave in the northern or western Himalayas at the right time can melt a lot of snow and ice very quickly. And so when that is coupled to even normal monsoon rainfall in the Indus Valley, can give rise to floods very, very quickly. So although it is now, I would, I'm sorry, but I would say it is fashionable to attribute these kinds of events to climate change. I, as a climate scientist, I'm not really very convinced that that's the case. Okay,
Okay.
it's bad enough, but it may not be because that But as I said in the beginning of your, answering your question, I think we are pretty close to the threshold when we'll be able to actually say whether some such events are due to climate change or natural variability.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I think, Dr. Mehta, we are at the end of our time. Do you have any final words that you would like to tell the viewers?
Um, I would say that this is such a serious issue that it needs to be brought to everybody's attention, and major efforts need to be organized, not just in India. Many parts of the world are facing similar problems. Okay. India's problems are multiplied by, um, I would say, number of people and also lopsided development and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And I would say really not very long-term thinking. So I would like people to think more long term and take these things, these possibilities into account. And some are not even possibilities; they are happening right in front of our eyes, such as the water scarcity and impacts on agriculture and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's end it here. Let's say bye to the viewers. Bye bye for now. Next time I'll have another distinguished speaker. Till then, bye.
Thank you very much.